My name is Alida Steigler, and I would like to warmly welcome you to this LawTransform webinar on abortion backlash and the significance of the 22nd of October, both in Poland and the world. The Center, LawTransform, is a collaboration between the University of Bergen in Norway and the Christian Michelsen Research Institute. Aims to understand how law and rights are used as a tool to reach social change and to what effect. And I would like to recommend you that if you would like to check out our page and to follow us on Facebook if you are interested in the kind of research that we do, or if you want to know more about our events. And as for today's webinar, we will talk about what happened on the 22nd of October 2020 and how it was such a momentous day for abortion rights, both in Poland, but also in Europe and globally. So on that day, the Constitutional Tribunal of Poland ruled illegal and in violation of human dignity in cases where the foetus has disability or incurable illness. Poland already had one of the strictest abortion laws in Europe, and 98% of all terminations carried out in the recent years were actually done on the basis of foetal malfunction. So basically now this virtually prohibits abortion in the country. And this case is actually also part of highly contested judicial reform procedure in Poland, and also this long fight between the government and citizens in regard to abortion rights. And also on this day, 32 countries signed the Geneva Consensus Declaration on promoting women's health and strengthening the family, where they explicitly stated that there is no international right to abortion. And while emphasizing the promotion of equal rights for women, the preservation of human life, and the need for universal health coverage, this declaration, in fact, goes against existing international commitments regarding reproductive health and rights. Countries from all continents sponsored this declaration, starting from the United States, going through Brazil, Uganda, Egypt, Indonesia, Hungary, and Poland actually was also amongst the first to sign this declaration. And now, before I introduce our panel, I would like to let all of you know that it's throughout the whole webinar, it will be possible to ask questions via the Q&A function or via the chat function. So if you have any questions, just please feel free to ask and don't keep it in yourselves. So to introduce our panel, and I would like to start with Neil Datta, who is, hi Neil, who is the Secretary of the European Parliamentary Forum on Population and Development, a network of parliamentarians from across Europe who are committed to protect sexual and reproductive health and rights. He has nearly 20 years of experience in the field of political involvement in population and development, and has conducted in-depth research on anti-choice activity in Europe. And we are lucky to have him as a LawTransform affiliate. And now he is also working on the legitimacy challenges project here with us, collaborating from afar, but with us. And then our second panelist is Marta Wysocka. She, together with Monica Dentale and Anna Sambur, are the co-founders of Orkidé Bergen, solidarity with Polish women in Bergen advocacy group who support women's rights in Poland, and they also serve as a platform for communication about events, demonstrations, and workshops. And then our final panelist for today is Karolina Więckiewicz, who is a Polish activist and lawyer who provides legal advice at the Polish Aborcyny Dream Team, a charity foundation helping women get information on abortion, educating and supporting those in need. This organization is also supported by many organizations and also the main movement called Strajk Kobiet in Poland. So I would like to warmly welcome all of you and thank you all for joining us today. And now, actually, I think I would like to give the word first to Neil. And what I would really like to hear about is how your work relates to what has been going on now. And also, if you could tell us what has happened on the 22nd of October, 2020.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alida. And it's great for me to be here with all of you and also to see old friends such as Karolina on the same call. I've prepared a little PowerPoint, which I'll share with you, which I think can take us through some of these events that took place on the 22nd. So if you'll just give me a moment to sort out the technology. Voila. And is the PowerPoint projecting?
You can put it to full view, but we see it.
Yeah. Is it projecting accurately now?
Not yet on full view.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. I'm sorry for this technical glitch. Okay. Is it projecting now? Yeah. What happened on the 22nd of October? I'm sorry for the glitch. Should be back to normal now. So first, what happened on the 22nd of October? As Alida already mentioned, a few things happened, but she mentioned two of them. I'd like to point to three of them. So first of all, in the United States, the Senate Judiciary Committee confirmed Judge Amy Coney Barrett to be the next Supreme Court judge, and she was later confirmed the following week. Also, as was mentioned, the United States and 31 other countries signed a document called the Geneva Consensus document, which reaffirms the assertion that there's no international right to abortion, and also reaffirms certain problematic statements about the family and also LGBT rights. And then also there was this big event that took place in Poland, where the so-called Constitutional Tribunal, in quotation marks, makes a ruling against abortion on the basis of fetal anomaly. So these three things all happened on the same day. But the 22nd of October is also another day. I'm not too sure if many people knew, but it's also the feast of Pope Jean Paul II, 22 October, commemorating the day that he was the start of his pontificate in 1978, which has since become a Catholic holiday, a feast day. And there, so that's also on the 22nd of October. And you can see there some of the statements that the Pope made in relation to the family overall. As the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the whole world in which we live. And then also on abortion specifically, the legal toleration of abortion or euthanasia can in no way claim to be based on respect for the conscience of others, etc. So these are well-known positions of the Pope. And so I'll take us through some of the events of that day, of that 22nd October in more detail. So in relation to the Supreme Court, so there was Judge Amy Coney Barrett, who passed the first hurdle of her confirmation hearings in the US Senate. What's important to keep in mind is not just her conservative views and what may happen to Roe v. Wade and abortion rights in general in the United States, but this is really simply the visible tip of an iceberg of what's been happening in the US judicial system over the past 4 years of the Trump administration. Well, on the one hand, the Trump administration is often viewed as being chaotic and not having been very effective, for example, in relation to COVID. But one area where the Trump administration has been extremely effective is how they have been able to appoint judges at the lower courts in the United States. So that there's a report that's been produced by a group of Democratic senators in the United States entitled Captured Courts, which highlights how over 300 of these judges in the lower courts are all linked to Christian right think tanks, such as the Heritage Foundation, the Federalist Society, among others. And now they're sitting on the benches of the US courts. So what this means is that abortion rights is not just at risk at the level of the Supreme Court, but at all the different lower courts as well. And it's not just abortion rights, it is also a whole range of other rights, including LGBT rights, and then also an expansive understanding of religious freedom, which is used to curtail rights in other areas. If we then take a look at the Geneva Consensus, and as was mentioned by Alida and myself, an international document against the right to abortion, among others. In fact, this is the culmination of years of efforts of the Christian right on sexual reproductive health and rights, health and human rights under the Trump administration. So already as soon as the Trump administration was put in office, what's called the global gag rule was reintroduced and expanded, which basically stops any funding towards organizations in any way involved in abortion, even simply referring to another organization for abortion, and also stopped funding the United Nations Population Fund. So that was the first year, that was the first week in office, and it has been a constant of every Republican administration since Ronald Reagan in 1984. What's new, though, is the US withdrawals from the UN Human Rights Council in 2018. Last year, there was the 25-year commemoration of the ICPD Program of Action, the International Program of Action on Population and Development, which first brought into UN language the concepts of sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights. The US under the Trump administration was against this and was able to rally 10 countries also to take a stand against this program of action. And that was in 2019. And then 2020, as you all heard, the US withdrew from the WHO. So there's, under the Trump administration, we can see the continuity of withdrawal from sexual reproductive health and rights, human rights in general, and health. With the Geneva Consensus, as was mentioned, it's promoting women's health, strengthening the family. Basically, that means against abortion, sexual reproductive health and rights, and LGBTQI rights, co-sponsored by a number of other countries, one from each continent, and 27 other countries. And then I would like to also bring into the understanding another thing that was launched earlier this year, which was in the United States, launched by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, a commission on what's called unalienable rights. And so the basic premise of this is that human rights are complicated and often contested, so it's better to simplify these and then also create a hierarchy of different human rights. So the ones around which everyone can agree on are religious freedom and the right to property. All other rights are controversial and contested and therefore of a lower order. And so we should be really working on human rights in terms of religious freedom and the right to property. So you take all of this together, and rather than interpreting this as a case of the United States withdrawing into one of its famous phases of isolationism, I think it would be better to see this as a proactive attempt to create a new health and human rights infrastructure, in fact, an alternative global infrastructure for human rights and health and health. If we then take a look at the Polish abortion ruling, there are two other Polish speakers here, so I'll really just touch on the bare bones of it. So it's a ruling of the Constitutional Tribunal against abortion on the basis of fetal anomaly, and it's more than 90% of existing of legal abortions in Poland. So it ends up in being a de facto ban on abortion. Some things to keep in mind is that the Constitutional Tribunal, and you'll see there, I always put it in single quotation marks, is that it is itself very much contested both within Poland and by the EU, and is the subject of infringement rule of law infringement proceedings at the moment. Another thing to keep in mind about the opinion of the Constitutional Tribunal is that the legal opinion of the Marshal of the Sejm, that's the Parliament, has judged or issued an opinion saying that the ruling is basically illegal, according to a whole range of different measures. But then if we take a look at the origin of this ruling, the Constitutional Court took a decision on the basis of a parliamentary initiative, which asked the court to make this ruling following the defeat of the plan to introduce in 2016 a complete ban on abortion. So after that complete ban on abortion, which, if you remember, is what led to the Black Marches, then a group of ruling party MPs then launched an initiative addressed to the Constitutional Tribunal. One of the reasons why the Marshal of the Sejm judged that the ruling was illegal is that one of the signatory MPs of this initiative in 2016 then became a judge on the Constitutional Tribunal. So there, I mean, you know, any first year law student will say that there's a basic conflict of interest. Then, if we then take a look at this, at the 2016 abortion bill, which sought to ban abortion, that bill itself was drafted by an NGO called Ordo Iuris. Ordo Iuris is itself part of a transnational organization called Tradition, Family and Property. And this Ordo Iuris and related organizations related to TFP, Tradition, Family and Property, have infiltrated many levels of the Polish state, and they're also present in other countries. So that's one thing to keep in mind, and we can go into more detail if there's interest later on. Also, one thing to keep in mind about Poland is that whatever happens in Poland does not just stay localized in Poland. So that just recently, in October of this year, both Poland and Hungary blocked reference to gender equality as a core value in the EU-Africa strategy. The month before, Poland invited a number of other East European countries to jointly exit the Istanbul Convention and also adopt an alternative convention on family rights. There's also this alternative convention on family rights, which is the international variant of the municipal pro-family rights declaration that exists in Poland, which later on came to be known as LGBT-free zones by LGBT activists, was itself also drafted by an organization within the Ordo Iuris Tradition, Family and Property orbit. And then we see also fears that what's happening in Poland could also infect other countries, although to what extent other countries will follow that line is up for debate. And so what does this mean? we see that on the one hand, there's an increase in what would be called lawfare. So that's the use of courts or legal mechanisms in order to advance certain aims. In Poland, what we see is that there's a very proactive legal harassment of progressive leaders and abortion providers. So that right now it's a number of different progressive leaders that are facing civil lawsuits by Ordo Juris and other actors. We see also there's an increased use of the courts in Europe on these issues. So Poland with fetal anomaly. A few years ago, Bulgaria judged, the Bulgarian Constitutional Tribunal judged the Istanbul Convention against the Constitution. And then within this context, we have reports that the same US organizations which helped place all these judges into the US lower benches are also spending over $280 million in funding here in Europe. So we see this happening here also. Then also what we see is the emergence of parallel or alternative diplomacy, with the United States erecting a parallel human rights and health infrastructure, Poland engaging in a global fight against what they call gender ideology, and also Hungary joining in with its own contribution, taking a look at demography and demographic decline, and how demographic decline, of course, is the result of selfish women who don't want to have more children, who prefer to have jobs, who have too many abortions, and of course, the LGBT. So maybe final thoughts. Some of the questions that were raised by the organizers were about whether these events are connected. Well, what we can see is that there's an interrelated set of actors, funding flows, and meeting places and venues where all of these actors meet and strategize and converge. And we see that there are the same transnational strategies, narratives, tools, and targets. So this is not to say it's a big international conspiracy, but rather that there is an alternative vision of the world that is being conceptualized and then implemented across different countries. Now, whether the 22nd of October was a rational or was a strategic decision, perhaps. Definitely the Constitutional Tribunal in Poland and the US government with the Geneva Consensus document had the choice of which day to release their opinions. And the fact that it was on 22 October, the same day as the feast of Jean Paul II, perhaps was not an accident. But also all of these things are adapted to national contexts and different opportunity structures. And then I'd like to end on this, which is asking whether this is really a backlash or not. The title of this is Abortion Backlash, but I would like to actually question whether this is the right conceptual framework for that. What we see here is basically the emergence of a new mobilization of ultra-conservative forces. And this new mobilization is centered around an alternative, illiberal, and socially conservative normative political project with its own set of objectives. So I would say this is not really backlash, since it's not a reaction to anything, but really this is a proactive movement which has its own objective in its own right. And I think perhaps that's one way that we need to take a look at this, rather than seeing this as a backlash or a reaction to progressive advances. So I'll end here. I hope that I've been on time and that it sparked some thoughts. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Neil. And actually, I think this final comment where you said that what we are seeing is actually not a backlash, but maybe could be looked as maybe as abortion lawfare, just from an anti-choice angle and against progressive movements. So I think it's definitely something interesting to keep in mind and to think of. And I think it was also a very good introduction to kind of understand these abortion these dynamics against sexual and reproductive health rights, like globally, to see these kind of alternative diplomacy on them. And now I would like to hear from Marta about your organization and basically the role of activists in Poland, but the role of the activists internationally, the social mobilizations we see. As Neil mentioned already, there was the Black March in 2016. What we see, is it something similar? The government tries to restrict rights, there are protests. Is it the same? Is it different? What is going on?
Hi, hello. Thank you for this nice introduction, Alida, and for your very interesting presentation, Neil. I think it gives us a very good kind of background and context. Let me start maybe with the organization that is very new and recent. Together with Anya Sambot and Monika Dentale, we decided to kind of take actions because we didn't find any similar feminist organizations in Norway. I live in Norway since March only, but they living already many years, and we all have very different backgrounds. But basically, we want to support and fight for women's rights. Right now, we're focusing on sexual and reproductive health rights and supporting strikes and for all the strikes and demonstrations that are happening in Poland. We want to talk about it in Norway. We want to spread the awareness and, for example, through such workshops and webinars, spread the knowledge and talk about it, even if the topic is not, it can be considered taboo or not, and kind of force other actors to reply and kind of take a stance on that. That's about this organization. We also organized a small demonstration in Bergen. There are a lot of things happening all over Norway. There were big peaceful demonstrations in Oslo. There were in Stavanger, Trondheim. So there are a lot of people that want to engage and show the solidarity. So we kind of working here locally. And about protests in Poland. The Black marches, the Black protests that Neil mentioned, they started in 2016, and also the All Poland Women's Strike, the biggest social movement that's leading the strikes now, also started about this date, and it was kind of a response to a proposed legislation that to tighten abortion laws. The laws were already being tightened since 1993, 89-93, and Karolina is an expert on that, so she's gonna tell you more about the history of abortion laws in Poland. I will focus a bit more about the strikes. So basically, this movement is decentralized, grassrooted initiatives, and it was started by but basically people going on the street, and it was called Black protest because people were wearing black clothes, the black umbrellas, some were using hangers to kind of show the symbolism of that illegal abortion is very dangerous, because banning the abortion is not making the abortion disappear, it's making the abortion illegal and dangerous. Then in 2017, there were some further intimidations from the police. There were some raided offices, confiscated documents against the women's strike that was led led still by Marta Lempert. And there were more or less of engagement and demonstration, but the tipping point definitely was on the 22nd of October, with the ruling of Constitutional Tribunal and this decision that was kind of like a tipping point for many other things that happened afterwards, because it started with abortion laws and fighting for women's right to choose, and the strikes were led by women, and it was mostly women on the streets. And now this movement escalated to a very, very big social phenomenon, and some people are demonstrating strictly against the ruling government. Some people are kind of manifesting their sadness and not accepting the politics. How we are also in the middle of pandemic, so it's very unusual times. And this movement that kind of grew from the supporting women exploded to this mass protests that are happening in so many places in Poland. It's not only big cities. There are like small cities and towns, and so many people are mobilizing and showing this solidarity, and are not afraid to go out and speak up, even if in the middle of pandemic. And that strikes are very strongly the participation in the strike are very strongly discouraged, and a lot of different measures are taken from the police and the Polish government to discourage people. Maybe I'll just mention the very recent event that happened 2 days ago. On the 18th, there was a big demonstration on one of the squares, and I think it was the first like open manifestation of violence and from the police, and like a clear message, because the tear gas was sprayed all over the people, and there were a lot of plainclothes policemen that were not wearing uniforms, that were demonstrators, that it was a peaceful demonstration, and even members of the parliament that were there, and they were showing the documents, were treated as a violent demonstration. That was really, really shocking and emotional for me. Yes, and I think that's kind of like a short summary what's going on right now with the strikes, and a bit of the description from a person that lives abroad from already 3-4 years, very very concerned, and what's to kind of act upon. And there's a lot of strike internationally. We were looking at strikes in UK, in Germany, and even in Australia, in South Korea. There are people making banners and posting it on social media and spreading this awareness and showing solidarity from all over the world, which is very heartwarming in this times. That's all from me for now.
Yeah, thanks, Marta. And I think it's very interesting. So basically, these protests are not really against just this tribunal decision then. But also, I think what is interesting, and Karolina, I think you can help us out here, is this was the Constitutional Tribunal who made this judgment, but people are protesting against the government. And as Neil also mentioned, there is this like kind of contestation around the Constitutional Tribunal in Poland. So I think it can be very interesting to bring in the legal perspective now, and how dynamic between the ruling party and the Constitutional Tribunal. How is this judicial procedure? Because this judgment is still not in force. Can it not come into force? How does it work? So if you could give us a background about like the religion in Poland, especially around abortion rights, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation. And yes, I was asked to give you more of an introduction to the situation, more overall in terms of the abortion ban that we've been having for almost 30 years now. It's 28, it's going to be soon. And how the current situation is looking in this perspective. First of all, until 1993, we had the act from previous political and economic system in which it was possible to have an abortion in a hospital for free. It was a normal provided medical service. It does not mean that normal and okay to have an abortion, but yes, many people had an abortion. And this experience is very common, and the change of the law when it became impossible to have an abortion. Polish hospital, people just had to go somewhere else. So the law is not really forbidding an abortion as such and making it illegal, but it makes it impossible to have medical service provided in a Polish hospital. So only in 3 very narrow cases, and we know from the global research that these cases stand for up to 4% of all abortions performed. Only in these 3 cases, a person who's pregnant can have, in theory, because in practice it's a lot more complicated, can have a service, an abortion as a medical service provided in a hospital and in a hospital only. So these cases are when the pregnancy poses a threat to a person's life or health, when pregnancy is a result of a criminal act, or when there are medical proofs, so to say, that there is a serious and irreversible abnormality of a fetus or a incurable disease, lethal disease. It's very, very specifically said. And so only in these 3 cases, a person can go and say, like, I want an abortion, please abortion. And it's really, really, really hard to actually have one in the hospital. It's only around 1,000 abortions a year performed in Polish hospitals, and from many different analyses and from many angles, we can say that this is not what should be performed in Polish hospitals due to the population and all other aspects, but only 1,000. It's only a lot when we take into consideration the additional ban that has been created by the so-called Constitutional Court right now. But yet, take into consideration that abortion is only available as a medical service in these 3 cases and has been since 1990. The rest, so people who cannot access the service in a hospital for many reasons, because there are additional obstacles that are imposed on people. So it's, you know, many, but conscientious objection being one of them, the most severe, but also requiring additional documents, not really understanding the provisions and saying that this abnormality is not within the scope of the law, or very difficult situation of those whose pregnancies pose a threat to life or health. These are very rare. And also those of abortion being a result of a criminal act. There are no abortions performed on this ground, or they are also hidden. So we don't really know, but all people who cannot access abortion in Polish hospitals, but also those who do not fall within the scope of even trying, they have to do it in another way. But it's not illegal to do it in another way. Abortion is legal in this understanding that we don't have a right to have an abortion within the Polish healthcare system, but we are free to have it in another way. So we can go abroad and have abortion in a clinic or in a hospital outside Poland, and also we can really obtain medical abortion in this understanding that we can get abortion pills from abroad or even from Poland to take it home and have an abortion in this way, which is a safe and effective abortion, and very, very popular. What's illegal is when doctors perform an abortion outside hospital and outside the provisions of the law, but people who undergo these procedures are not committing any crime. So it's never, there are never criminal charges for a person who terminates their own pregnancies. So it's only those who perform that service outside of the law. So it's not that bad in the meaning of this freedom that we have. It's just that our parties, politicians, governments, not just the current government, have been telling us for ages now, we don't care. There is no abortion for you, healthcare system. Do what you want. We will not criminally charge you for that. We will have provisions in the Polish criminal code, which means that there is criminalized aiding and abetting, which creates, other obstacles and puts people in this area of crime and criminal behavior, even though it doesn't mean that people can go to jail for their own abortions. But still, the huge amount of stigma and total denial reality. Because as Marta said, no ban can create a situation in which there are no abortions. And no, they are not illegal. And no, they are not unsafe. They are safe abortions abroad and safe abortions at home. What it means is that our politicians, our governments, our state in general, for almost 30 have been our state has been telling us, we don't care what you do. You're not important to us. So, but we will use abortion for our political interest. We will play with abortion. We will sell or trade abortion for something else, with the church, with another party, with anti-choicers, with different actors. That was done at the very beginning when we as the state signed the Concordat. So this contract with Holy See, it was a leftist president, it was a leftist government. Another example of that, accession to the EU, when there was a draft law in the parliament presented by a leftist party, and we had a leftist president, and the church said, you want our support in accession referendum? Get rid of that. What did they do? Okay, because their goal for that time was to get us to the EU. And it was very clear, give it up and we will give you support, and we will tell people in churches that to vote for the EU. So there are this. Abortion is, nobody talks about abortion as such. Nobody talks about abortion reality, abortion experiences. It's, everything is outside the law and nobody cares. And that's what's going on. And what happened, and since I can remember, there have been attempts to restrict this provisions even more. And it is fair to say that Law and Justice has never been this party that had tried it. There was never ever any draft law presented to the parliament by Law and Justice to restrict abortion provisions. It has always been done by anti-choice organizations such as Ordo Juris that was mentioned before, and the Foundation Pro Right to Life, and another Life and Family, they are of course also having different interests between, among one another, but that's for another conversation, and I don't really like to talk about them. They have too much space anyway. But so it is worth mentioning, and it is only fair to say that really Law and Justice never presented anything. They had always been like, the compromise is okay. Of course, it's not a compromise, because when the abortion law in this shape was adopted in 1993, there were only church and politicians were involved in this discussion. So it's really not a compromise. But this language of a compromise has been really repeated for many, many years now, and politicians such as Donald Tusk, Civil Platform, Central Prime Minister, we have a compromise. It was so hard to establish that, to elaborate that. We cannot really do anything about it. And it's bullshit, because it's not a compromise when we leave 97% of people who need abortions outside of the law. It's not in the middle. But people believe that. People believe that it is very radical to have an abortion on demand, so-called until 12th week. It's a radical thing, on the other side of which is a total ban like we have in El Salvador, which is total bullshit, because the another end of that continuum is Canada, that has no abortion-specific law at all. And most of the countries have this compromise to restrict abortion, but not totally. And they meet in the middle and they say, okay, you can have an abortion until 12th week, unless there is something very serious going on, then you can have it later. So that's a compromise that many, many countries decided to have in their legislations. We have a ban on abortion in Polish hospitals, but in this understanding that luckily we still have a freedom to terminate our own pregnancies. And what did Constitutional Court do? I call it Constitutional Court, Constitutional Tribunal. I agree that there are many doubts about this, even a position of an independence and everything. It's not even, considered a really valid institution in Poland and internationally. And this judgment, this decision, I don't even know how to say the decision, this piece of paper, it was a ruling that was presented to the public, that abortion on the ground of fetal abnormalities is not in accordance with Polish constitution, but it's not about dignity. It was very clearly stated that it's against the right to life, which is one of the really of the forest, legal, I don't even know how to say that. It's just totally invalid in terms of legal argumentation, because a fetus does not have a right to life, is not a person that has rights and obligations under the law. But it was stated like this, so they didn't even rule about those discrimination arguments or dignity or anything. They just took that one article on the right to life, and they said that it's not in accordance, using the argumentation and the type of narrative that was presented by those who really came up with this motion to the Constitutional Court, that's saying that the fact that it is possible within the law and in practice also to have an abortion in a Polish hospital because of the condition of a fetus, that is an eugenic practice. Sorry, I have to repeat that. I feel awful to do it, but that was in the motion, and that was repeated by the Constitutional Court, that it is impossible to, they cannot agree with that, because it is legalizing a eugenic practice of exterminating people who are accused of a certain disease or abnormality, which is disgusting. It's just outrageous. It just has nothing to do with law. It has nothing to do with constitution. It has nothing to to do with dignity. It has nothing to do with human rights. It is just putting everything that has been elaborated also within the international human rights system into the trash, saying we don't care, like we're going to use eugenics just because we can. So it really is, for us, for me as a lawyer also, it's really hard to accept, because these people are lawyers. And you know, and it's like, for me, impossible to even present such a such understanding. But we know that there are more lawyers like this. They mentioned Orkidé, of course, that is a legal think tank. So yes, there are lawyers who are capable of saying such things, and there is not much we can do. But you asked also about the practical dimension of that. So what is going to happen? Well, what is going to happen is that another group of at least those 1,000 people who had abortions on this ground in Polish hospital a year, these are joining this group of 100,000 people a year who are told, we don't care, do whatever you want. We won't provide, like, we won't spend money for that. We won't guarantee any access. We won't train our doctors to do that. We just don't care. Just, you know, leave the country, do abortion at home. Like, we don't care about you. It's not our problem anymore. And we are not thinking about you. We are not considering you. And it's just, you know, so these people like have to do something if they realize that there is some condition of a fetus that makes them make this decision that they don't want to continue their pregnancy, that they want to terminate that pregnancy, that they have to do something, like they have to find another way to do this. And there are ways, like they are for all the other 97% of people who have abortions, who do not fit within the system or decide not to try to obtain that service within the system because they know that it's going to be very difficult and humiliating. So they still can go abroad. They still can take pills at home because pills do work also after 12th week of pregnancy. So they need information, they need reliable, trustworthy source of pills, information and support. And also in many cases, they need financial aid. And we've been trying to take care of that basically ever since, because right now, as Abortion Without Borders, which we are a part of, together with many groups and organizations from around Europe, and we've been doing this for a year now. We started in December 2019, but since a month almost, since 22nd of October, we've been receiving many more calls. Just to give you an example, we now have almost as many calls a day as we used to have for a month. So it's enormous. And also it is happening due to the massive protests that have been going on since that Marta was describing, because the Abortion Without Borders number is now, I would risk a statement, the most recognized, the most commonly known number, maybe besides 112, like this emergency number, that this is the most recognized number in Poland right now. It was everywhere, on churches, on buildings, on streets, on transparents, on Facebook, everywhere. People are sharing that, like, you need an abortion. No, they are of course protesting and trying to like influence a decision that this is not going to become law, but still we know that the practice is functioning already like this was a law. You know, like hospitals are not providing abortion on the ground of fetal abnormalities. So it is going on. It doesn't matter that the judgment as such is not published yet, which means that it officially is not a part of the judicial, legislation or judiciary in Poland. It's not. Formally, it's not, but it doesn't matter, because people still cannot get access to abortion on this ground as of the day that it was announced. So what we do now, as you know, like also as I mean people who are on the streets, we are saying, okay, you're not alone. There are groups, there are organizations, you can support them financially, you can tell other people about them. You know, they're spreading information, because we know for years now that the only thing that we have is each other. And abortion in Poland is happening. People have abortions, but they are having those abortions because feminist groups exist, because there is solidarity, self-organization, and support around Europe and in Poland that makes it possible, because our state does not care. And what is going on now is the fact that people in mostly second trimester with indications, with diagnosis of fetal abnormalities, have to now find and seek options for termination outside the system, because they are another, you know, group that was told, no, you don't care, do whatever you want. And we are for them. As Abortion Dream Team, as Abortion Without Borders, together with many organizations around Europe that they can approach to, and we will help them. But yes, in terms of like the symbolic also message that is sent, as I said, it's just, you know, we don't care. And the fact that it's been done also with this limited responsibility, so to say, like this is an independent institution, it's not, you know, it's not parliament, it's not government, it's the court, tribunal and everything. It's just, you know, it's just really, for me, it's just disgusting, I would say, because we know in what shape now and in what kind of independence the Constitutional Court now operates. So it's really it's a political game in which people, pregnant people or people who can get pregnant, always lose. And it's been like this forever now in Poland.
Yeah, and it seems that with the Constitutional Tribunal capture, there's also no institution really who can step against, or step up for the Constitution, or step up for European international obligations of Poland then. Yeah, and also Marta, you mentioned, actually I think Karolina also mentioned, but Marta, this like the role of the Catholic Church and all this stigmatization going on, but also at the same time this, I guess, what are you doing as well, Karolina, these abortion campaigns, but like mostly also the role of the Catholic Church is very interesting in Poland, I would say. Marta?
Yes, there is this, as Neil also mentioned, gender ideology, and it's all kind of interconnected, because as everyone is aware, like the Catholic Church influences in Poland are very, very deeply rooted in our history, and they're influencing insane amount of decisions, and it's kind of like everywhere, on every level. So there is this psychological kind of trauma, and you can call it like abortion trauma in Poland, that there's an insane amount of guilt imposed of those women that are decide to undergo abortion. And it's, you know, they called like I think it's not only in Poland. Like recently you have very interesting seminars about Argentina case, and I think it's similar in many countries, that those women are stigmatized and excluded, and they just you know, called baby killers, and even within their own families, within like partnerships and close relationships, and they can be there's a huge polarization also in the Polish society. Even if it's going even deeper, not only about abortion, about political choices, and supporting or not supporting people with LGBT communities. There's also a big, like this haven't been mentioned, but the media, the public media, that are controlled by ruling government right now, there is a huge indoctrination. Also in schools, in public space, in media, there is no like objective sexual medical education in schools. Instead of that, small kids are taught the good morale of Catholic Church. So how to be a good wife, why abortion is good, and why abortion is bad, and what kind of bad consequences can it give you. And so it's this is the kind of structural violence against women, and it kind of all comes down to those inequalities that are manifested in a kind of on every single step. And it's 2020, and we still have to protest that, we still have to fight that, and we cannot be we cannot agree on like small wins that we have on the way, because you still have to stay alert and not go for compromises that are actually not compromises. And also I think it's very important as a national debate. It's not a medical debate. It's like it is only discussed in an ethical and moral way, and maybe one of you can comment on that, because in my opinion it's only within what is bad, what is good, where that begins. But before coming into this narrative of you can never say if it begins at the day 1 or 10 weeks or 12 weeks. If we go into this narrative and this debate, we always gonna kind of be on this position that we cannot argue. But if we take a step back, talk about, okay, so we have women's rights and humans' rights and a choice to decide for your own body, or you want to go to this ethics and say what is wrong, what is good, and what is wrong in the world. Which can never be discussed objectively. So
yeah, and also there is no like primacy over one right or the other. Like you have the woman's right to self-determination, and then you have the state's obligation to protect this possible formation of life. But I think you mentioned that you wanted to say something.
Thanks. Yes, I just wanted to come in on the point about the Catholic Church. And so that was raised by the two other speakers, and it's a very important role, but also in other countries. But I think also in terms of the Catholic Church, we have to take a very nuanced approach. The Catholic Church is not a monolithic institution. It's a very, very diverse institution with many different currents, and these currents are competing with each other. And now in Poland, we have to see, and this is taking place in Poland as well. And in Poland, at least two different religious movements which are pulling the hierarchy towards more conservative positions. One of them is the Redemptorist community headed by Rydzyk and his big empire, who's very present in the Polish media space. To the point where different Polish conservative politicians come to each other to appear on the television program or on the radio program, and this guarantees them a certain space. I mean, for example, it's the same way that US Republicans want to appear on Fox News. Like this, it guarantees them a certain viewership. Another one is the one headed by Ordo Iuris, and Ordo Iuris is simply one aspect of a whole constellation of interrelated organizations under the umbrella of tradition, family, and property, which is an ultra-conservative religious movement. And in some countries, it has even been branded as being pseudo-Catholic because it has had very conflictive relations with the formal hierarchy of the church. And this And this movement, we're finding out now, there's articles appearing this week, that it's very, very well, it even competes with the Ridzik Empire in terms of wealth. And this movement also pushes the Catholic Church towards more traditionalist perspectives. So I think when we talk about the Catholic Church, we have to see it, there's the officialdom on the one hand, but then there's private religious actors also pushing in different directions. So I just want to add that.
Thank you, Neil, for that. Thanks also for all the work that you do on that. There is, but also another perspective of that is that for years we've not been talking about abortion, talking about everything: fetus, beliefs, views, morality, God, when their life starts, when it ends, and all this. But we haven't been talking about abortion, and it's everybody's fault, including the pro-choice movement. And I was not born with, you know, the stigmatization, normalization, and everything. I've come to this because at some point we realized that the Abortion Dream Team, that we are politicians to anti-choicers, to everyone, as the pro-choice movement, as the feminist movement, women's movement, you call it. We've been talking things like nobody wants an abortion, we just want a right. There are some women out there, we fight for them, they need abortions, you know, we don't know who. And, you know, of course, it's always a hard decision. We want abortion to be legal, safe, and rare. I've been, you know, I used to say things like this. I used to come from the UN and saying like, yeah, abortion should be rare. And now I'm like, hey, why would it be my goal to limit the number of abortions? And who is to decide how many abortions a year people should have? So at some point we realized that the whole, you know, like the whole big group of people who have abortion experience are excluded from this. And not only they are not talking about their experience, but they also have to hear all this bullshit that we are talking to politicians and that we defend, like, oh no, of course we don't want an abortion, we just want a right. Oh no, I wouldn't do it, but I will support your right, blah, blah, blah. And all these things that are stigma driven are coming with the point of view that abortion is something bad, that this is some void, that we don't want this, that we should take all possible measures not to get pregnant if you don't want to be. And, you know, and all these people are in stigma, in shame, especially when they don't, you know, when they don't feel anything bad about this, if they don't regret it, and if it was not a hard decision for them. So we realized that there is something wrong in terms of that. These people don't hear that abortion is something bad, that we should limit it and nobody wants it. They want to hear that, you know, abortion is okay. It's okay that you had one. It doesn't matter what your reasons were. Whatever you felt before, during, and after your abortion is fine. And you are not alone. We are having abortions. People in Poland who can get pregnant get abortions. It's really, really, really many of us. And it's time to start talking about experiences, about abortion reality, the fact that they happen. And it's not a political statement on abortion. It's an experience that some people have and some don't. If you ask me if I had an abortion and I will say yes or no, I mean that you know things about me, that you know who I vote for, if I go to church, where do I live, if I have children or not, if I'm heterosexual or not, how much money I have, if I'm educated or not, where, you know, all these things. It's not a political declaration of views, beliefs, and any other things about my life. It's a simple thing. I had an abortion or I didn't have it. So it's just, you know, a very common experience, yet it is still a very simple medical intervention in our body that has its own laws and all criminal procedure provisions, because there is an understanding that is worldwide that it is something bad, that it is something to put restrictions on. And it's never about people who, it's always about institutions, doctors, barriers, and possibilities to deny access to abortion, because all abortion laws are stigma driven and they reproduce abortion stigma. It is very normal that people think bad things about abortion because we've been living under you know, an abortion law as such, criminal provisions. You know, most of us, you know, majority of our reproductive lives. So it's very normal that people think of it as something bad because that's the predominant narrative around it. And right, so we've been fighting for hearing the voices of people who have abortions, talking about it not as an abstract, like abortion is something, but it is the common experience that many of us have. And it's and worldwide, like literally 25% of abortions of pregnancies and in abortions, and that's a fact. So and it's nothing bad. It's part of our sexual lives, and it's just there and will be there forever. It's older than any law, medicine. It's just as old as sex. And it also is another thing, because a big taboo is feminine sexuality in this country, and the fact that we can have sex without consequences is something that very many people in this country cannot accept. So so it's about that. It's about sexuality and the fact that if you have sex and you're a person who can get pregnant, you will be punished by your pregnancy, and will force you to continue that pregnancy because you have to take responsibility and consequences. But yes, if there is a consequence of pregnancy after sex, there is also a solution to that if you don't want to continue that pregnancy. But it's something that many people, and especially politicians that are more conservative in society, cannot accept.
Yes, so definitely this kind of supportive structure and education and this support and like promoting this normality is something that is very needed, and that's why also these groups needed, and what you can do both on a national and international level. But if like as a one last comment, Neil, if we could go back to this international global level, something quite big happened since the 22nd of October in the US. You to have a new president. So how is that? Because I also feel that these countries, like as you said, like something happens in Poland, something happens in other countries, but there is also this new, or maybe there was this new alternative building. So just as a final comment, how do you think this will affect these dynamics between countries, this new global infrastructure, this new alternative? How will it be affected by Joe Biden being the new president of the US?
Yeah. Yes, thank you for that. Well, let's still keep our fingers crossed that he will become the next president, because it's getting better every day. But
I was going to make the comment. Thanks for that.
It's a small risk. But assuming
being optimistic is also part of the way forward.
But so let's be optimistic and assume he becomes the next president. So one thing that happens is that these ultra-conservative forces will lose their leader, and in that a Republican of the United States. So the main leader is gone. So they become in a way decapitated. But then after that, what happens? One is that there's a lot of work on the part of the Biden administration to undo all the damage that's been done over the past 4 years. That's going to take a long time. We already know that within the first weeks or so, he's going to rescind the global gag rule, but that's normal. Are they going to be able to do anything to make sure that it can never be enacted again? That's still a question mark. And how they will unstitch all of this alternative diplomatic infrastructure that the Finns have created is unclear as well. I mean, they can rejoin WHO, that's planned, but what do they do with the Geneva Consensus document? Do they repudiate it or not? And what do they do with all the countries who had signed up? Another thing that can happen is, and that will be very interesting to see in relation to Poland, but also Hungary and a few other countries, is will there be other countries that take up the leadership in this area and try to fill in the gap left by the US Republican administration? We know that Brazil, very ambitious. Russia has been absent, but is looking for a role to fill here. And then we've seen that Poland and Hungary have been very bold in their positions, in defending their positions on certain issues. And remember what I've said, it's not just about abortion, it's not even just social rights, it's about an illiberal alternative political model. And just now, this week, you've all heard what Poland and Hungary have done in terms of the EU budget. So they're really digging in their feet, digging in their heels in terms of preserving their model. And then a final point is that simply with the Biden administration in, what was behind the Trump administration, and it was not Trump himself who was against abortion rights or all these issues. Quite frankly, it doesn't look like Trump really cares very much about women's rights. And by that, I mean, he really doesn't think about this. You know, he doesn't care about it. But behind him was the US Christian right, who fund the US Republican Party through a series of foundations, think tanks, etc. They were well rewarded by the Republican Party. For example, Betsy DeVos became education secretary. Her foundation is one of the main funders of the Republican Party and the US Christian right. What will they do? How will they reorganize so that in 4 years, they will aim to take back the White House and also make gains in the US Congress? The whole machinery that brought about this is still there and remains intact, and they will be planning for their comeback. So I think that's what we need to think about. And also considering again what I've said, there will be that machinery remains intact, and they don't necessarily share the same democratic values or adherence to the rules that we do. So how do we react to that? I mean, and just in the case of Poland, one thing that strikes me now is I'm in weekly discussions with the Women's Strike, Federa, other Polish groups, as well as Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, to coordinate about what to do. We know what to do when there's an abortion restriction that comes about, you know, how to mobilize. We are really at a loss to know what to do. What happens with an abortion restriction comes about in the context of erosion of democracy. This is something far beyond our normal skill set, and this is what's happening now in Poland, so that all of the international reaction that we've been doing, and it was mentioned by Marta, it's there, but at the same time, you know, it remains symbolic. How do we help pull Poland back from the precipice of illiberal democracy? And for that, we don't yet have the tools, I'm afraid. So I'm sorry to leave on such a depressing note, but I think we need to consider all of these things, you know, in terms of the Biden administration, all the work that needs to be done. Secondly, who will replace the US in terms of global leadership? And then also keeping in mind that the infrastructure that brought all of this about is still there, and they're preparing for 4 years, for coming back in 4 years' time.
Yeah. So thank you all of you for joining us today, and thanks also for the Zoom audience who was here with us today. I think we are left with much food for thought, and I would like to wish you all of you luck with your work, and yeah, we keep focus on this topic and wish for the best and work for the best. Thank you all for being here.